for the first time and probably forever, you just simply feel seen. And you can talk to your next door neighbor about actually receiving something from the American government.
I've been sick for 3 weeks and feel like crap. Anyways, Charlamagne Tha God was on Chris Wallace's show on CNN for a personal one-on-one interview about politics. So Charlamagne is a radio host, a celebrity. He's someone that I think he's popular because he's very authentic. Even when he's wrong, he's interesting. But I do often think Charlamagne, has something worth listening to, has comments worth listening to, has something to add to the conversation around politics. He does have an insight that I find interesting. So in this case, I do think he is hitting on something. So he talks about both Donald Trump, his thoughts, but also why he thinks Donald Trump is gaining in popularity with some black voters. I'll get to that in the second clip. But he also discusses in this first clip here what he thinks this election might come down to.
What do you think of Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump is a fascist who does not care about democracy in any way, shape, or form. And I think anytime you hear somebody say we should suspend the Constitution in order to overturn the results of an election, us as Americans should be terrified. Like that, like I don't care what color you are, what gender you are, what sexuality you are, what religion you are. If you have a man in power saying we need to suspend the Constitution for anything, you should be terrified.
So you think it would be dangerous for the country if you were to get back in the White House?
I think that's an understatement. And I think that's also the pickle that we as American people are in, right? Because, people may not be happy with President Biden right now, and they may not be happy with, things he's doing, but what else are you going to do in 2024? I think that is three options in 2024. You have Donald Trump, who's the criminal. You have Joe Biden, who represents the cowards, because I think the Democratic Party are cowards. They don't fight enough. And you got the couch. And I think, the couch is voter apathy. And I think a lot of people are going to choose to stay home in 2024. And that should scare us. The one time that people should absolutely positively be terrified and be afraid of what could happen to democracy is next year.
I think he is exactly right. So I will get to the second clip in a bit here, but these comments, first of all, yes, Trump is a fascist. This is not controversial. He tried to steal an election, not just, through Jan 6 and his speeches, but literally behind the scenes tried to steal the election. That's why he's facing, 91 charges, 4 indictments. At least part of the reason. So it's important to remember that. Keep that with you. How dangerous Donald Trump is and the people around him that want to see a dictator in power. But this is why I also agree with Charlamagne here. The biggest enemy of Democrats, I think, in the next election isn't Donald Trump, isn't Republicans, it's the couch. People will just stay home if they feel like how they feel right now. So there's a lot of recent polling. In fact, I think I'll do a separate video on the recent NBC poll that has some very interesting insights. But essentially, Biden has hit his lowest approval rating number. He's also right now, as you see here, he is dropping in support while Trump's has largely stayed the same. I mean, he's gained 1%, but he's largely stayed the same while Biden is dropping. And it's clear here, Biden isn't losing to Trump. He's losing to the couch. This is the Democrats' biggest issue. Voter apathy. You can't, as a party, as politicians, as candidates, you cannot rely on the scary other option for people to come out to vote for you. Democrats win. I think I've said this now in like every video I've ever done on Democrats and Republicans in polling and elections. Democrats win when turnout is high. They lose when turnout is low. When you have, the foreign policy part of this right now is, I think, important to this conversation as it stands. Who knows where we will be in a year and if the anger there still holds. But that's definitely a piece of it, especially for younger voters that see the Biden administration as no different than Republicans when it comes to foreign policy. Clearly, when it comes to this enabling of the far right-wing Israeli government, I don't want to go down a hole again because I've done 1,000 videos on that conflict in particular. But when you see the amount of the level of young support that Biden is losing, foreign policy is a piece of it, but also just generally, like when you are this close to Republicans on issues like healthcare, when you're still fighting for private healthcare as opposed to public universal healthcare, when you're still this close to Republicans on issues of, the climate crisis, sure, you could say, oh, Democrats they care more about the climate. They sure sound like they do in speeches. Is anything really that different? I mean, the climate crisis, healthcare, the cost of education, low wages, go down the list. Yes, there are differences, of course, especially when it comes to, more socialist, when it comes to abortion, I think, which is why Democrats are really going to run on abortion. That is the one clear difference between the two parties. But issues like that, issues of trans rights, state to state, you can see the differences there. So there are, of course, differences, which is why it's important to understand that Trump is a fascist, and that there are differences. But you, as a party, as a Democratic Party, you cannot rely on that, on those differences, which in the grand scheme of things are fairly small. So, there's a year left. There's going to have to be a complete turnaround, a complete shift to the left from Joe Biden and the Democratic Party for them to gain back those young voters, or for them to even get young voters to come out to vote, whether they came out last time or not. So that's going to be a major issue. But let me get to the second clip here, where Charlamagne discusses why he thinks Trump is gaining with some black voters.
So if you believe the polls, Donald Trump is picking up support among black voters, and especially among young black voters. Mm-hmm. How do you explain that?
Okay. If you have a community, and I can't speak for all black people aren't monolithic, but I'm just telling you based off conversations that I've had and what I see. If you have a community who feels like they've never been spoken to, by the government, ever, like American government has, ignored them, not paid them any attention, and let's just say all of a sudden you start getting checks in the mail one day, the stimulus checks, what they call stimmies in the hood, for $1,200, and this man's name is on them, Donald Trump. For the first time and probably forever, you just simply feel seen. And you can talk to your next door neighbor about actually receiving something from the American government. Another thing, the First Step Act. People see the First Step Act. If you know somebody who
criminal justice reform.
The criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
If you know somebody who actually came home because of the First Step Act, and you have Donald Trump taking credit for that, that's another thing you can point to and say, man, Donald Trump not only let one of my peoples out of jail, he also sent us money. This is the guy taking credit for all of these things happening. And I think, believe it or not, that stuff is having impact.
Do you think that Democratic politicians take the black vote for granted and get offended when somebody like you just ask them a question, just challenges them?
100%. And anytime you're a person that people think is left-leaning, if you just simply question what the Democratic Party is doing, you either get accused of being a closeted Republican or, attempting to help Donald Trump win elections.
Okay, I want to get to his comments on the stimulus checks because I feel incredibly vindicated. But before I get to that, these comments here about the reaction that the Democratic Party has, and we're talking about, politicians, advocates for the Democratic Party, people that work within the Democratic Party, the reaction that those people have to criticisms from the left is completely opposite to what the Republican Party's reaction is to criticisms from their base. And I'll tell you exactly why. It's because of capitalism. Republicans' criticisms of their party does not threaten capitalism. The left-wing criticisms of the Democratic Party does threaten capitalistic powers. That is the main difference. So in case you're wondering why there is a different reaction, it's not simply because Democrats hate their base, although they do. It's because of the threat to capitalism. So, perfect example is healthcare. The reason why the Democratic Party overall is not fighting for Medicare for all, to eliminate private insurance as a requirement for healthcare, is because of capitalism. They want those private interests in there because those private interests are intertwined with their party. So that's, one example, but you can go on the list that you can insert capitalism into every single policy issue of the Democratic Party, and it's largely a reason as to why the Democratic Party is off of where their base is. Now, on the stimulus checks, when this first happened, I shouldn't just say I did this. Many people on the left discussed that this was a brilliant political move by Donald Trump. Again, it's important to be able to separate. You can criticize Donald Trump, the person, the president, separate that from the brilliant moves he has made politically in terms of how it's viewed by the masses. These stimulus checks, putting his name on the checks, brilliant political move that Joe Biden, for some reason, did not replicate. Joe Biden also sent out stimulus checks. He didn't put his name on them. I don't know why. Just stupid politics not to do that. So as ABC News writes here, in the end, President Donald J. Trump appeared below the words economic impact payment on the memo line of the final version of the checks, which were sent to 35 million Americans. Unlike Trump, Joe Biden's name did not appear on a new round of stimulus checks that started going out this spring, although, like Trump, Biden did sign a letter mailed to Americans to notify them about the payments. Just complete political malpractice to not just do what Trump did and put your name on the checks. Really stupid. So, it's hard to know exactly why. There is some growth in support. Obviously, as Charlamagne points out there, just like all voters, there's no monolith, right? Like trying to act like, oh, black voters are, some of them are supporting Trump more now because of this one thing it's ridiculous. I'm sure there's a variety of reasons. But this generally, I think, did help Trump in the eye of the public, having his name on these checks that they get and they get to cash. So, again, we're a year away. I keep saying this whenever I cover these polls and this election, because so much can change. These may not even be the candidates. Who knows? Both of them are very old. So, and Trump is facing 91 charges, 4 indictments. Anything can change. Anything can happen. So it's impossible to know where we are going to be in a year from now. But the way things are looking, Democrats should be very concerned about turnout. And, complaining about people and trying to, I don't know, like shame them, if that's even the proper term here, into voting is not going to work. Even though it seems like it does appear like the rational thing would be to ensure Trump doesn't gain power again. That doesn't mean you're going to get people out to vote. That responsibility is on the Democratic Party. They have to actually listen to their base, and the only way to do that is be willing to challenge capitalism.